The Laurentian Great Lakes are a special place on Earth. Nearly 34 million people live, work, or play along their shores. They are home to many species of wildlife and fish, provide drinking water, transportation corridors, and even can reshape the weather. For Indigenous peoples, the Great Lakes have been home since time immemorial and are important centers of food, culture, ceremony, trade, and spiritual well-being. But commercial fisheries, a once widespread industry in the lakes with boats in many ports, have been slowly disappearing from public view. Today, many people who enjoy eating fresh fish in the Great Lakes region have little idea of the men and women who bring those fish to their plates. In this film, you will hear stories from fish harvesters in Lake Ontario, Lake Erie, and Lake Huron, and learn about the uncertain future of a uniquely North American fishery you've likely never heard of.
Well, I did all kinds of jobs. I did farm jobs, I did factory jobs, I did road construction, I did high-rise construction, but it was always fishing that I liked. So you're outside, your own boss, you come and go when you want, nobody tells you what to do, you do what you want. But you have to be very disciplined to do that. You're the one that has to get up and bring the paycheck home. It's in your blood, and it's hard to get it out. There were a lot of fishermen at one time, a lot. Little ports all over the place, but not like Lake Erie and those places where they have big tugs and they pull into port. These are all little boats that push off the shoreline or at a dock at somebody's house or backyard and stuff. There was a lot of fishermen, but they were spread out and they worked hard. Didn't make much money.
The fishery contributed very heavily to the development of the county, particularly in early years, because it was a staple for much of the farming community, with 500 and some miles of shoreline here. You wouldn't find a farm family that didn't rely on part of their diet coming from the fishery. I've been fishing now I started when I was in high school as a student, and actually public school, the end of it. So I've been fishing about 60 years. So I got into the fishery because my family was basically a farming family, and there was a fishing colony right by the farm, harbor, and in the summertime I'd be out in a tomato field pulling weeds out of tomatoes on a 90-degree day, and the fish boats were going out into the lake, and it looked like a lot better gig to me than pulling weeds. So that's kind of how it started.
We always fished so we could afford to farm, because come planting time, working time in the land, you always needed some capital, and we were never a family to believe in banks, so we never borrowed money, and that was always our capital to start farming.
While commercial fisheries exist across the Great Lakes, those in Lake Ontario are clustered in Prince Edward County, a region known for its wines and picturesque agricultural landscapes. Joanne and Kendall Dewey have been fishing in the Bay of Quinte, which borders the northern side of the county, for decades. While many women work in commercial fisheries, processing and supporting fishing families from shore, Joanne is one of the few women who work aboard the fishing boats.
Oh, hello, my name's Joanne Dewey, and I am the deckhand on the boat, basically.
Yeah, my name's Kendall Dewey, and yes, I own some commercial fisheries here in Lake Ontario in the Bay of Quinte, and she's more than just a deckhand on the boat. Why have I become a commercial fisherman? I'm fourth generation commercial fisherman. I started my life in northwestern Ontario at a fish camp that at the time was accessible by float plane or by boat. I fished the last year my father fished in Lake Huron as a commercial fisherman before he had to get what most people would consider a real job in order to support his family. But that was back in the decline of the Great Lakes, the great decline of the Great Lakes, with the algae blooms and the alewife die-offs, et cetera, et cetera. But here it's over 33 years.
Throughout their lives, Kendall and Joanne have worked other jobs to make a living, but not all have aligned with their preferred ways of life.
I knew I wasn't a good government employee because there were certain things I couldn't say yes to, and certain things I couldn't toe the line with. And I've always been a fairly independent, hard-nosed,
Stubborn old mule.
stubborn kind of a person, as Joanne says, a stubborn old mule. I won't deny it. I won't deny it. But being able to commercial fish allows me to be a stubborn old mule and an independent cuss because I choose how to fish. And I've made how I fish an occupation into itself. And
That's why I say I'm the deckhand.
Before the arrival of European settlers in the Great Lakes region, Indigenous communities had developed rich commercial and food fisheries over millennia. Today, many communities continue to operate commercial fisheries for food, ceremony, and cultural purposes, as well as an exercise of their treaty rights. One such community is the Saugeen Ojibway Nation, whose territories sit in the Saugeen Peninsula, also known as the Bruce Peninsula, in southwestern Ontario.
The Saugeen Ojibway Nation are two sister First Nations, the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation as well as the Chippewas of Nawash Unceded First Nation, both occupying the same territory, which extends roughly from just south of the Maitland River in Lake Huron, around the Saugeen Peninsula, and over to just shy of the Nottawasaga River in Georgian Bay. So these two communities have lived within the territory and fished for commerce, ceremony, and food since time immemorial. However, of course, there's a bit of a history when you talk about European settlers coming into the area. So back when settlers first came into the territory, the Saugeen Ojibway Nation actually leased out parts of the fishery to those arriving settlers. But you had legislation come in, like the Fisheries Act, and when that legislation came in, it was really served as a means to take control of the fishery, or attempt to take control of the fishery. And the Saugeen Ojibway Nation never agreed to relinquish any control and never gave up any of those rights to the fishery, including the commercial fishery and any of the treaties or agreements. So come to about 1993, one of the fishermen, a man by the name of Francis Najuan, was charged for overfishing, and it was decided that it was time to take the Crown to court and fight what was seen as an unjustified infringement on that right to a fishery. So the chief at the time, Howard Jones, and Francis Najuan fought the case in court, and it was reaffirmed that the Saugeen Ojibway Nation did not give up that right to the commercial fishery. So as of today, the Saugeen Ojibway Nation are the only ones that are still fishing as a commercial enterprise within the traditional territory. That continues on to today, and very much a strong desire to continue that on into the future, which means making sure that that fishery is there for the next 7 generations to come.
My name's Alan Robichaud. I'm a fisherman from Nawash-Ingneming. My business is Robichaud Commercial Fishing. I've been fishing for like about 22 years, 23. A friend of mine said they were looking for help on a boat, and I needed a job, so I went and tried it out. It's pretty tough at first. I didn't really think I was gonna stick with it, but once I got a couple weeks in and just got to know it, I was always working with buddies of mine. It was pretty good that way, and just kind of got into it and got good at it, and job close to home, and always with friends or family. So it was a good job to have for me, I guess. Where we live on the reserve, there's not that many jobs up here. When I was young, there were a lot more boats up here, and guys were doing good. They're making good money, I've had other jobs, like I've worked in a rock quarry, so there's worse jobs than fishing out there. I've done different jobs, and I always go back. I love fishing, and I've worked other places and wish I was on a boat, so fishing. So that's why I steer towards fishing myself. My boys, I always tell them fishing's always here. Anytime, you know, off, they're not working, or, you know, maybe they don't like where they are, they always have a spot with me. There's always a spot open on a boat, so.
Elsewhere in the Great Lakes, commercial fisheries are larger, with more ports, bigger boats, and traditions of music, art, and culture that celebrate fish harvesters. Port Dover, a small town on the northern shore of Lake Erie, is one such place.
It's just, it's a romantic life to begin with, and when you're a kid, you look at those fishermen out there as if they were swashbucklers, like the movies you see. I was born in 1948, and the boats back then were, some of them were still steam-powered, and the hulls were still around, I could see them. And I love the old wooden boats, and they had a certain smell. And it just, everything about the lake and the people seemed to be ingrained in me. It just got me from the very beginning, and I knew I wanted to be a fisherman. When I was in school, the boys that were in school with me were all going to be fishermen. And so that's just like our lives were set out before, and we were destined to do that together.
The family aspect of Great Lakes commercial fisheries is important across the lakes. While Lake Erie may be the smallest of the lakes, it is also the most productive and hosts the largest concentration of commercial fish harvesters, including many who are second, third, and fourth generation fishermen, carrying on livelihoods started by fathers and grandfathers.
I think when you grow up in a family fishery, it's just kind of in your blood just to want to get out there and be on the lake, and it's something you enjoy doing. And I mean, there's good times and bad times, so I'm sure that's with every single job, but maybe it would have been better to get an education in something else as a backup plan, but there's always work in the marine industry, and having a license to work in that, there's probably limitless jobs for that.
Carson fishes with his brother Landon and father Paul aboard the Lincoln R. They fish 9 to 10 months a year from their home port of Port Colborne and other ports around Lake Erie. The life of a fish harvester can be demanding and sometimes dangerous, dictated by weather, the seasonal movement and availability of fish, and the nature of catching a highly perishable food. Like farmers, their day often begins before the sun comes up.
So on a typical day, we would wake up maybe around 4 a.m. or so, and then everyone would meet at the boat, say at like 4:30 in the morning. We get things started up, and then we leave the dock heading towards our nets. We wear rain gear, so protective oilskins to keep the water off us. Then we also wear nylon gloves to protect our hands, but the fish are removed from the gill nets with basically like a bent nail in a wooden handle, and that's used to move the meshes around the fish until it can be pulled free. And then they're placed into tubs and iced. Weather is obviously an issue in our industry. Sometimes too hot, sometimes too cold. We work in the early spring and we work in the late fall, right till the end of December. So we do work in ice sometimes, and that can be hard on your body. When the weather's bad, that's typically when things start to go wrong. That's when things break, there's more pressure on everything. So it's never a nice, flat, beautiful day when you start to have problems.
Waking up in the morning when it's cold and blowing, go and pull your nets, and they're loaded with moss, slime, stick, brush, twisted, tore up, and there's no fish in them. That's a bad day. The motor blows, that's a bad day. Flat tire, bad day.
Some of the biggest dangers are just mainly your crew. You're constantly watching them on deck because you're always at times leaning out the side to grab this or grab that, eh? And guys we're not wearing life jackets, which I don't know if anybody does, but just having somebody fall over, or you're setting nets at the back, if somebody gets caught up in a line or something, which I had a lot of stuff get caught, but Most of the time it hasn't been people, lucky for me anyway, but there has been issues where people have got caught and got pulled over and stuff. Most of the time everybody's come out of it without any problems, but there has been some bad endings too over the years.
It just takes a toll on your body, your arms, your back, you know, everything. So I actually haven't been up to the puller for about a month now because I pulled some muscles in my shoulder, and it's about ready. I feel it's about ready to tear. So these other guys, you know, let me exactly so I can just sit and pick. Which, you know, that's one thing we do. If somebody's hurting or whatever, not feeling well, we take care of each other.
While fishing itself can be a dangerous and demanding job, the environment where fish harvesters make a living is also changing. Over the last century, the Great Lakes have been polluted by agricultural runoff, industrial waste, and more recently, plastic pollution. While significant strides have been made in improving water quality and the health of aquatic life in the lakes, there are some human-caused changes that can't be undone.
Some of the challenges we see now is mainly due to, I think, the climate change. It seems to get warmer faster, and for some reason it seems to get colder faster. I don't know, we just can't find anything in the middle.
We've got bloody red shrimp, we've got gobies, we've got Lord knows how many different algae that may or may not have come in through ballast water. We've got different types of vegetation that have come in through ballast water. The number of invasives in the Great Lakes is huge. In my time, the major impact that has affected the Bay of Quinte, Lake Ontario is zebra mussels. And the side effects from zebra mussels are almost too numerous to mention. The most obvious side effect was the clearing up of the water, because of course they devoured all the plankton, and as a result of that, the clarity of the water became noticeable 4 to 5 years after zebra mussels invaded.
The major changes that have particularly caused species shifts, I guess you'd say, have been the zebra mussels have had an impact, the cormorants have had a huge impact, and the most impacting thing, I think, of all is overplanting of lake trout and salmonids that have damaged beyond repair almost the forage base for the perch and pickerel particularly.
There's also a strong belief within the Saugeen Ojibway Nation that the stocking of fish from the Pacific West, like rainbow trout and coho salmon, Chinook salmon, pink salmon, you have brown trout from Europe, you have all these different fish species that are being brought in and dumped into the lake in order to try and drive a recreational fishery that are believed to be directly having an impact on the native fish species that the commercial fishery relies on.
While ecological changes are an ongoing challenge to commercial fishing fleets, past poor fisheries management has also been a culprit in leading to overfishing of some species. Today, Great Lakes fisheries are managed by a combination of provincial, state, and Indigenous groups to prevent overfishing and keep track of fish populations from year to year. In the Saugeen Ojibway Nation, also called San, fisheries management is part of their established treaty rights and is conducted in agreement with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry.
Within First Nations, the fish is brought in and then kind of shared throughout the community, in particular to the elders and so on. And in some ways, that's how the commercial fishery is set up within San, which means that there is no individual quota. It's more of a collaborative allotment of fish that we call the total allowable catch, or the TAC.
San fishers must report their catch and fishing effort, data which is then used to inform decisions about each year's TAC, a decision made by a fisheries governance committee who consists of the chiefs and councillors of San and the assistant deputy minister and some directors from the Ministry of Natural Resources.
From San's perspective and the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, there's a strong desire to make sure that that fishery is sustainable, and San really focuses on that next 7 generations. So San certainly do not do not want to see that fishery disappear because it is such an essential component of, the culture, the economy, food, all these things. It's very important for the communities.
Outside of Indigenous fisheries, the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry sets annual quotas and issues licenses for the commercial harvest of fish. Introduced to the Great Lakes in the 1980s, Quota is a management tool that controls how much fish is harvested each year by setting the TAC on each lake and proportionally allocating it to individual fish harvesters. Quota systems allow people to fish when conditions are good because their share of the potential catch is guaranteed, and regular catch reporting allows managers to know how much of the TAC has been harvested at any given time. While quota-based management has had some positive impacts, unexpected challenges have also arisen.
The original concept of the quotas was that if you owned your own quota, you could fish them when it was best advantageously for you, either from easiest to catch or when they might be at their highest value, or whatever circumstance that might pop up. The idea was good. Quotas in the overall help to probably stabilize the price to some degree. So quotas aren't all bad. Unfortunately, there are things that nobody anticipated about quotas.
While quota was originally allocated to active fish harvesters at no cost in the 1980s, it has since become a valuable commodity, and for young people trying to get into the industry, it can be prohibitively expensive.
I would say that it is virtually impossible for anybody to get into the fishery at this time if they don't inherit, if they don't have huge financing already available behind them. Because to buy any fishery that is a complete unit to itself, you're probably looking at several $1 million. To buy a boat, a license, with enough quota to go out and make a good living is definitely going to cost you probably more than $1.5 million, could be as high as $5 million. How many people coming out of school or anything else are likely to have that kind of money? One of the faults in the system is that it makes no allowance for the fact that whoever has the most money wins. In almost every case, that means a processor. Now, in some jurisdictions, a processor cannot own the quota. They have made that in some places to try to protect that from happening. Unfortunately, in Ontario, that was not the case. The problem is that then the processor ends up owning the majority of the quota. Then the small operations, and they're already running into this in the industry, they can't get people to come to work because not enough of the money gets back to the original owners. Now it's mostly corporate entities, and they a lot of them take a chunk of the profit right off the top, and they lease it to somebody. It's not good for the industry because the boats are the ones who are getting less and less. It's harder to get people to come to work. People don't want to work in the industry because they're not making enough money. The reason they're not making enough money is the corporate entities are squeezing both ends to make their profit. So I'm not saying, like I said, I understand it. I'm not suggesting it shouldn't exist, but it is a failure in the system that was originally set up. There should have been a protection in place so that somebody can't own all of the fish.
Tough question, but do you think it would be possible to do that now? To put such a protection in?
Yes, in fisheries other than Lake Erie or in Ontario, because I know some of this protection already still exists, then yes, it's something that helps to protect it if you can keep it from becoming all corporate. Could it happen here? Yes, but is there the political will to do it? Probably not.
Processors play a critical role in commercial fisheries, including providing fish to food services and the general public, and in some places, making small or remote commercial sales possible. Many fish harvesters appreciate and have personal relationships with processors in this region. In commercial fisheries around the world, though, quota consolidation has contributed to creating barriers to the next generation of commercial fish harvesters. This issue contributes, in part, to an aging commercial fishing fleet where fewer new or young fish harvesters are entering the industry. In fisheries research, this phenomenon is known as the graying of the fleet.
A lot of the commercial fishers, when you talk to them, have strong concerns that there are not as many individuals within the communities that are interested in pursuing commercial fisheries as a career choice and as a lifestyle choice.
It's not a steady enough income. It's kind of a roller coaster. You might have a good week and make tons of money, and the next week, or you may not make anything. You may lose money for 2 weeks. So it's not a steady income. That's why my brother never got into it. He wanted a steady paycheck, and it doesn't happen that way.
It's a tough thing, because it's a time-consuming job. They say you start early in the morning, and sometimes it's 7 days a week and certain times a year, and a lot of people don't want to get involved in that. Like they want a 9-to-5 job from Monday to Friday and weekends off, and that's it.
I have my sons work on the boat, and at the same time with the decline, like fishing has been on a decline the last couple of years, it scares me to push them into fishing because, you know, I don't want them to have a struggle and have a hard life, so they do other things.
Well, the biggest thing I find, people just don't want to work because this is a hard job. You know, today is nice out here because there's no wind, you know. But when it's windy, it makes a hard job like sometimes impossible.
That's the problem. Our world's got away from the physical labor part of it. Everybody wants to do things the easy way, and there is no easy way to do some things.
Now there's not a whole lot of people left. Full-timers, there's probably 6 or less full-time guys. There's a lot of part-timers that hoop net in the spring and the fall, but full-timers, maybe 6. There's very few. Most of them are dead. And nobody took over, or somebody amalgamated, bought them out, passed it on. Yeah, there's a lot of them are gone. When I started, I was the kid that used to go to the meetings with the ministry, and I was, probably 16, I don't know, wasn't very old, and I never said anything. I just sat in the back and listened to what went on, and almost all those guys are gone. Now I'm the old guy that sits at the meeting. So,
yeah, I think for people getting into the industry, really we mostly see that it's just generational, people taking over from their fathers. It's hard for someone who's not in the industry maybe to get into it and be maybe as profitable or just to understand the industry. So we don't really see a lot of people from outside fishing families getting involved.
I'll just use the example of the boats that I'm working with right now. The 5 or 6 trawlers that are working, the average age is probably very close to 60. There is not much to encourage anybody else to go and go to do the extra work, to go to school, to try to achieve getting their captain's certificate that would then allow them to run a boat. As you get older, it gets harder to do things. I still enjoy it, but if I fell down once, I'm more likely to hurt myself now than I was 20 years ago. I could be all done tomorrow, and not because I wanted to be. But that would mean that not only would I not go to work, but then I don't know who would take the other 2 guys that work with me to work. And if it happened on another boat, 2 or 3 other people maybe can't go to work because there's nobody to run the boat.
Employment has been a concern, and then also a concern that there is nobody to pass down their information to so that the next generation can have their own fishery and see some of the benefits that this generation has.
With the death of all the older guys, and I'm talking probably 40 or 50 fishermen that I knew when I grew up that are gone, the knowledge is gone. It's totally gone. And some of the fishermen were very secretive, never passed it on, and what they knew would be so valuable, but it's gone, and gone forever. And myself, I have actually passed mine to my daughter. She has the maps of every place I fish, what I fish for, at what time of year, what gear to use, the exact location. So when at least she's got something to look at. So she has something, but most of that stuff's gone.
A lack of young people coming into the industry and a loss of knowledge being passed from one generation of fishermen to the next is a problem not just for the fishing fleets, but also for the restaurants and supermarkets that depend on their catch. Commercial fisheries are food fisheries, and unlike many Canadian and American fisheries elsewhere, the majority of what is caught in the Great Lakes is eaten in the Great Lakes region instead of being exported overseas. While today most fishermen sell their catch to one of several large processors, it was once more common for fishermen to catch, process, and sell their own catch in their local community. Today, a few fishermen still sell their own catch, though the number is dwindling.
When we began buying fish from other fishermen, we did that more as a means of trying to obtain better prices for the fishermen, because we knew that the local buyers were maybe taking a little more than what they really needed to be taking. We were supplying restaurants before we actually started buying fish, but it began to snowball. And so we were selling fish to people coming in off the street. We were selling fish to, I really don't know how many different restaurants here in Prince Edward County. And the one thing that we did stress to the restaurants was that this is truly locally caught.
While Great Lakes yellow perch and pickerel can be bought in grocery stores around the Great Lakes region, for many people, eating a freshly cooked fish at a lakeside restaurant is a special summer tradition.
In Port Dover, they're not just fishermen, they're people that we live with. When the fishing was tough, when in the old days, I guess you call them, when they had to go out in any weather, and if they didn't go out, they didn't make any money. Well, it was dangerous, and there was tough times when they couldn't go out, when the lake was frozen over, and there was no income coming in, and they need a lot of support in this town, and Dover was great for that. They looked after each other, and so did my parents try to help out, never turn anybody away, and so they too do the same for us. Like when they know that we're having a hard time maybe getting our supply of fish, we start getting phone calls from different fishermen. Or talk to us on the street and say, how you guys making out with your perch and stuff like that. All right, so the process has started. We have our fryer up to about 350 degrees here, ready to go. Got our fresh yellow perch here. Just gonna start loading it up to what I'm used to for myself to cook. Prefer to have the fresh perch rather than frozen, but sometimes you don't have a choice depending on the fishing season, and with quotas that's changed quite a bit. This is our Nectal family secret batter.
The Nectals invited us inside one of their Port Dover restaurants to see their family's process of bringing fresh fish to the plate. Just as every fish caught is hand-picked from gill nets, each piece of perch or pickerel is hand-battered and fried. The fish is then paired with fries, coleslaw, and homemade dipping sauce, a special summer tradition for many Ontario families. Back on Lake Huron, Great Lakes fish are an important cultural, spiritual, and dietary species for the Saugeen Ojibway Nation.
So fish, or gigoyak or gigo, has been absolutely really a central part of the two communities. And if you take a look historically, there were trading networks that were established with other communities, and that's how the commerce part came into it. But my understanding from talking to community members is there's also a strong cultural, spiritual component to fisheries as well. They're actually relations. They're not just a resource like you see in kind of the Western way of doing things. And then there's always been a really strong focus when fish is caught, traditionally, that fish would be shared with the community, and in particular with elders and those that maybe would have a harder time getting the fish on their own. And some of it is processed within the community and then sold, whether it be, for example, at a local market or to local restaurants.
when I got my own boat, I just started doing the same thing as just shipping the fish out and small sales here and there. I always thought like, oh, we should be filleting this and selling it ourselves because we're missing out like on the buyers don't treat us right all the time, and we're just kind of at the whatever they feel like offering, and that's what we just always took. So when COVID hit is when we really started. We'd go set and pull our nets on, and then we would fillet and try to sell everything ourselves. Word of mouth got around, and we can sell most of our catch that we can process it. So, and local stores pay more than the bigger buyers, so works out with keeping it local and doing as much as we can ourselves.
Regardless of the type of boat used or fish caught, fish harvesters around the Great Lakes have one critical thing in common: a need to get to the water. As shorelines around the lakes develop, many are finding that their access is disappearing.
Yes, access to water for commercial fishing it's absolutely essential. I mean, that's where it all happens, is out in the water. And for the Bay of Quinte, we trailer our boat from fishery to fishery, so we depend on boat launches. The number of boat launches and the condition of boat launches in Prince Edward County, despite being, some people like to be calling it as an island, and the amount of shoreline exposure it has to the Bay of Quinte and Lake Ontario, has incredibly few boat launches. And fishermen have been using existing launches and areas that they used to launch, which are no longer being used because they're now private property where somebody's got a cottage on it.
It used to be the boat ramps were accessible. You could get to them anytime you needed to. There wasn't nearly the volume of tourists that we have now. Some boat ramps are restricted. Wellington, there's certain times you can be there to put your boat in, and if you're not back by a certain time, you can't take it out. So, and you need a permit now, you have to pay, whereas we never paid to put a boat in anywhere in this place. Yeah, and usually you knew your neighbor. So if you needed a spot to pull your boat up, you just, hey Joe, I'm gonna pull the boat up. Yeah, go ahead. Now you don't know your neighbor. He's somebody that came from away.
So we're quite close to Toronto here. We're only a couple hours away. And what's happening is that a lot of individuals are either building or buying cottages within the territory, and everybody that has a cottage or a house on the water wants to have their own little piece of the waterfront, and oftentimes that includes developing that waterfront. And this might mean everything from putting out a dock, digging a shore well, those kinds of things. However, what we've seen is that everybody wants to try and be as close to the water as they possibly can. So they're building their cottages, they're building their shore wells and so on, and it's all right on the edge of the water. 10 years ago, the water levels were extremely low in Lake Huron, and so everybody was adjusting their cottages accordingly. People were building new cottages further out so that they could take advantage of the new waterfront. Now we're at a period where in the last few years, the water levels were very high, and all those adjustments that were made, now we're seeing that the water levels are actually in some cases to the point where they're hitting into the walls of these cottages that were built on the shoreline. So of course, the individual cottage owners are thinking, this is really bad for my cottage. I need to protect my cottage, and in a lot of cases, what that means is bringing in armor stone and that type of thing, which serves to harden the shoreline and protect their property from getting damaged by essentially the water that they've built so close to. When you're talking about one cottage, that's one thing. When you're talking about two cottages, sure, okay. But when you're talking about the entire shoreline throughout the territory and start looking at the bigger picture of how this is impacting the shoreline itself, you're starting to see some very significant impacts.
While changing shores and a lack of access to water affects fish harvesters all around the Great Lakes, fishers from the Saugeen Ojibway Nation face additional social problems within their own territorial waters.
Fishing in Quota Bay for the commercial fishermen has been very difficult because there's a lot of individuals out there that as soon as they see a net go up in Quota Bay are out there damaging the nets, cutting off the net markers, and basically calling the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry because they don't want nets within the bay, because that is where they like to go and fish for their introduced salmon. We've certainly had vessels that were, cut free and off their moorings, so then you have a boat that's out adrift out into the lake. All those kinds of things happen on a regular basis.
I've had problems going from dock to dock, like pulling into different harbors and stuff, and just people think they're like for the sports fishing, and they think that we're in their way and we're catching their fish. I've heard all this stuff, and we do deal with a lot of racism and stuff at places.
While prejudice, a lack of understanding about treaty fishing rights, and occasional damage or violence are ongoing problems for Saugeen fishers, elsewhere, a general lack of public understanding about the nature of commercial fisheries creates problems for non-Indigenous fish harvesters too. On the eastern end of Lake Erie, Carson's family has been dealing with a loss of working waterfront space due to coastal development.
Port Colborne is one of our main harbors. We've been working out of that for 70 years, my family has. It is a more populated town or city harbor on the lake compared to other harbors that are commercially used. So where we typically have unloaded our fish, they've started to build a dock for cruise ships. So we've been displaced from there. So now we can't unload in that location. This is something that's taking place in almost all our harbors. Now have condos being built in them. And people like the idea of living in these fishing communities, but sometimes having a lot of population right in your harbor and stuff doesn't make things very easy for us to operate in the ways that we have before.
In Port Dover, Rick Meisner also worries about the impact of tourism-focused development on the community's long-standing fishing industry.
Tourism is a pretty big thing, and unfortunately, a lot of municipalities see it as the only thing anymore. Tourism is going to save us because we're going to have tourists coming here to see the water. But a lot of those tourists come here because they not only can see the water, but they see the fish boats. They eat in the restaurants and they can buy the fish. They can take the fish home. Those restaurants, if there's no more fish, they're out of business. They no longer can sell that product because it doesn't exist.
In Prince Edward County, Kendall and Joanne's hoopnet fishery takes place in shallow waters near the shore, where they find fewer and fewer property owners understand the history or needs of their livelihood.
And a lot of people have moved down here, have bought waterfront, and they don't know commercial fishing at all. And we do fish, we're given set grounds, and so we have to only fish in certain areas. And so often that means it puts us in conflict with the people who own the property but think they own the water. And we try our hardest, we really try our hardest to not put our nets directly in front of people's docks. We like to give you space so that you can get to your dock safely. And we've had notes put on, tied to our jugs telling us, can you please not set your net in front of our house? We've kind of set it off to the side, but it's really hard because there's only certain areas on your grounds where you know that you're going to catch yellow perch, and unfortunately one was in front of this house.
And unfortunately, we used to have areas where you could set nets without having to worry about being close to someone's dock, but there's more and more cottages coming in every day. We have no say over where you put your cottage or whether you put a dock in or not. So, and we don't tell people this, but why should you have a say over where I try to make a living?
I can foresee down the road with the influx of paddle boards, kayaks, sea-doos, the recreational users seeing something in the water that they don't like and complaining and curtailing the fishing activities further yet. There was a situation a few years ago with it called Kingston turtles, where someone saw some dead turtles in a hoop net and the shit hit the fan. It's going to happen again. There's no doubt about it. It will happen again, and it will curtail us further yet. So,
in my honest opinion, there's no future in the tourist industry. Because if hard times do come, there'll be no tourists, and the county will have nothing to fall back on. Industry and real jobs and putting a product out on the market that people want is the future. Not on a feel-good, come down and pay $200 for lunch future. That's no future in that.
And even in our town, which is probably only 8,500 people, probably not more than 500 or 1,000 of them know anything about what we do. And most of them are only if they have somebody that may be in their family, somebody that's a friend of theirs who works on a boat, that they get some kind of an idea that there is something else going on here. And then it's quite common that they'll all be going to the hotel to have a meal, but they don't think about where does the fish come from. It's a normal pattern.
I think when you tell people you're a fisherman, especially on Lake Erie, people are really surprised. I don't think not everyone even knows that there is a fishery here, especially when you get into maybe some towns that don't have large commercial fisheries here, like in Port Colborne and Port Maitland, there's only a few of us. So not everyone understands. Once you get away from the lake, people just don't really know that. They know what perch and pickerel are and they eat them. They just don't really think of where it's harvested and where it comes from. So people are always really interested and surprised, but they don't really know a lot about our industries.
Great Lakes commercial fisheries face an uncertain future in Canada, and even more so on the American side of the lakes. These long-standing family fisheries are managing a revolving cast of aquatic invasive species, damage to fish habitat and shorelines due to coastal development, the graying of the fleet, a lack of reliable access to the water, and for Indigenous fishers, ongoing problems with racism, violence, and displacement from their traditional and contemporary waters. Despite all of this, many fish harvesters still see an optimistic future for their industry.
Well, some of these boats have been around for a long time. There's several boats that were built in the 30s that are still working, still fishing, and they're marvelous machines.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's part of why I got into the industry, just growing up with your grandfather on the boat and your father, and they teach you all their little tricks and ways and superstitions, and it's just something you kind of carry on. And maybe I make a few of my own little things along the way, but it just becomes a tradition.
And I see there's still people that want to do it. Like people that still want to be involved in that industry. They still love it. I mean, it's still kind of a cool profession. I think the fishermen here are raised on a certain level of admiration. They're revered. Like they have monuments for them, and memorials, and I think that the guys. You're proud to be a fisherman in this town.
Well, here we are still at it, and sometimes I really wonder what we're doing.
Yeah, it is
fun, and I love being outside. So
it is work. There is a challenge. If you're a person who doesn't like challenges, who doesn't like work, then don't become a commercial fisherman.
But I always think with commercial fishing too, you use your brawn and I use my brain.
Yeah. I think it is a combination. I think I do use my brain sometimes too.
Oh yeah.
Other towns along the Great Lakes may not see what we see here. And some of these people may not make the connection between those commercial fishing boats across the river over there not really knowing what they are. But Dover over the years has tried to promote the fishing industry, the commercial industry, because it's such a piece of the fabric of our community, and it's intertwined with everything. They know that when they're coming into the harbor, that everybody on the pier is staring at them, and locals go to the pier every day and they park there to watch the fishing fleet come home. And when the boats come into, they've started this new tradition. When they come into the harbor, they toot their horn. I mean, like a blast of their horn to say, hey, we're home, sort of thing. Some say it's, hey, letting their wife know to get rid of the boyfriend, but it's, and others say it's, hey, letting the bar know ready to start pouring the draft. But I think it's, hey, we're home and we made it. We've had a good day and we're back in the harbor, and it was a salute. I think it's a salute to Port Dover. It's a salute to the people on the pier. And it's just, they want to be part of this whole, it's not necessarily just a job, it's part of our community now, and it's ingrained. So that's what I see.
I said it gets into your blood, and it's really hard to get it out. I know there's fish out there, and I know I'd like to catch them, and I just gotta go do it. Anyway, and I'm still hoping that my kids, my grandchildren, might take over. So,
across these stories, one common theme is emerging. Great Lakes commercial fisheries have lost their connection to the public. They have become invisible to most Canadians, even those who live near them or eat the fish they catch. To ensure these fisheries remain a part of the Great Lakes story for future generations, that relationship must be rebuilt, and we, the public, must do our part in supporting both the fish harvesters and the health of the lakes and fish they depend upon.
Well, I'd like the public to know that they're losing something very important. If the fishing industry goes, that's a food source. It's a renewable food source. And if we lose an industry like this, it won't be easy to get it back. You can tell that right now by the fact that it's hard for these guys to get a deckhand. So it's just dwindling, and it will eventually just disappear.
I think that if people took the time to understand more about the fishery and educate themselves, then maybe they would have a bit of a different perspective about the fishery and understand, and I would hope that with understanding, maybe there would be an acceptance about the role of fish within Saugeen. The Saugeen are not out there decimating any fisheries. In fact, the Saugeen have a strong desire to keep that fishery going.
Nobody wants to catch the last fish, and as a young person who's invested their time and money, sustainability is our future.
You know, we talked about the fishery going on since time immemorial. I see the same thing going on forward. I don't see that the fishery will ever vanish from within the community. It's such an important and central part of the culture, and I can't imagine that will ever change.
This song is called 15 Miles to Go. It was written by myself and J.D. Semple, and it's about getting caught in a storm coming back from the end of Long Point in the winter. Hang on. I'll do that again. I gotta get my finger in the right place here.
Seas were calm this morning, the calm before the storm, but the winds came up without warning, and there's 15 miles to go. There's 15 miles to go. With 10-foot waves and rising, as we chart our course for home. And the gale force winds are howling, and there's 15 miles to go. There's 15 miles to go. Oh, the waves are high, the black clouds roll, as the rain falls from the dark gray skies. Our families wait along the shores of home, with small tears of hope in their eyes. And there's 15 miles to go. There's 15 miles to go. Now I have faced real danger 100 times or more, but the fear still grips me tightly as the waves blow in the doors. And there's 15 miles to go. There's 15 miles to go. Now the only thing between us and the safety of our port is these 15 miles of water and the cold wind blowing from the north. And there's 15 miles to go. There's 15 miles to go. Oh, the waves are high, the black clouds roll as the rain falls from the dark gray skies. Our families wait along the shores of home with small tears of hope in their eyes. And there's 15 miles to go. There's 15 miles to go. Oh, the waves are high, the black clouds roll as the rain falls from the dark gray skies. Our families wait along the shores of home with small tears of hope in their eyes.